Alfred Molina's portrayal of Dr. Otto Octavius is perhaps one of the most beloved comic book movie villains in recent memory, arguably living alongside even that of Heath Ledger's Joker or the X-Men's Magneto as one of the most intriguing antagonists of a comic book film, period. And after nearly 2 decades, he is finally set to reprise this iconic role in Spider-Man: No Way Home. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of his character is the combination of a corruption arc that sees him fall from grace early in the second Raimi film, followed up by the subsequent redemption arc and his return to heroism with his ultimate sacrifice in the closing moments of the very same movie, making Doc Ock one of the most compelling and complex Spider-Man villains we've ever seen, if not the most. Many have argued that his return threatens to taint this redemption arc and supersede his previous closed story arc. But according to some theories, this may not actually be the case, and Ock's return to the light might not only be maintained in No Way Home, but might occur earlier than we were previously led to believe. So stick with us, watchers of the Marvel Multiverse, and let's delve into the theory that Doc Ock's redemption will actually take place relatively early on into the movie No Way Home, and that he might spend just as much time, if not more, as an ally to the 3 Spider-Men rather than an adversary. The most important aspect of this movie and Doc Ock's character journey to remember is that we do not know exactly when he is pulled into the multiverse, and whenever this actually occurs on the timeline could have drastically different implications on the character's overall journey. Comments by Alfred Molina himself seem to hint that he is pulled into the multiverse just minutes after his closing scene in Spider-Man 2, where he has seemingly drowned himself in order to sabotage his fusion reactor experiment. And if this is the case, then there are a few plausible scenarios for his journey to follow. Octavius's redemption was centered around him regaining control of his mechanical arms, these arms that had essentially hijacked Otto's mind and implemented their own desires over his. In the film, he does this through sheer focus and power of will, overriding their control of him long enough to sacrifice himself in a noble final stand. If he survived this encounter, then it stands to reason that he might not be able to maintain his dominance over these arms, as again in Spider-Man 2 his control over them was only momentary, and that they will very soon after regain control of his mind once again, especially seeing as the catalyst for their corruption came from the destruction of Ock's inhibitor chip, which was specifically designed to shut them out of his head. During this encounter, however, he never managed to repair the inhibitor chip, and it stands to reason that his control might be temporary over the arms. While this could explain why he is more nefarious when he first meets Tom Holland's iteration of Peter Parker, it could also set the precedence for his early redemption, as he is already battling against the control of the arms yet again. It's also important to note that the color in the eye of the arms is red, which is only indicated when they have control over Otto's mind. Otto also seems to act with a certain amount of cordiality towards Peter and his friends, and though he seems to be imprisoned at the moment in time, he doesn't act aggressively or as if he intends to harm any of the trio. In fact, according to the trailer, it seems as if a bulk of the premiere highway fight takes place before he even comes to realize that this Spider-Man is not in fact the same variant from his home timeline, Tobey Maguire. It therefore stands to reason that he was fighting on instinct, with the arms in particularly specifically targeting Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, likely for convincing Ock to overtake control yet again and seeking to rain their vengeance upon Tom Holland's Spider-Man, mistaking him for Tobey's. Only upon learning that this is not his Spider-Man does Ock seem to hesitate, as if he was not intending on hurting Tom Holland's Spider-Man just for the sake of being evil, and instead was targeting his own iteration of Spider-Man at the behest of his arms. After this, he not only introduces himself honestly and openly, but he also seems to offer Peter a few words of wisdom along the way, implying that he has little or no motivation to hurt this cast of the Spider-Man characters. Throughout the course of Spider-Man 2, he seems to work on the interest of the greater good, even though the arms take control and persuade him to take rather destructive means of getting there. But his final intention within that film is to create a sustainable fusion reactor to provide an unlimited supply of clean energy for the world at large. It is simply the danger to the populace as a whole that he neglects to address that makes him into a villain and a threat. If the greater good is at stake, then his morality might be flexible enough to put him on the side of the 3 Spider-Men, including Tom Holland, depending on what the plotline of the remainder of the film seems to be. It's also important to note that he is conspicuously absent from what is implied to be the final conflict of the film atop the Statue of Liberty. We see this final showdown take place between Tom Holland's Spider-Man, Sandman, Sandman, the Lizard, and Electro. And while we have theorized that the other two Spider-Men were digitally cut from this shot, is it possible that they are not the only characters who were removed from promotional purposes? Both Otto Octavius and the Green Goblin Norman Osborn seem to be missing in this shot, and this leads to a few distinct possibilities. The first is that Doc Ock has had a change of heart and is actually fighting alongside the rest of the Spider-Men, making this battle a 4-on-4 instead of a 3 versus 5, as we had previously been led to believe. The other possibility is that this is the spectacle showdown before the emotional climax is set to take place. We know that Marvel and movies in general have a precedent for serving a climax purely for spectacle and fan service, and a second climax for the emotional and story weight of the movie in order to conclude. Perhaps the most iconic MCU iteration of this trope comes in Endgame, as the climactic emotional showdown between the Marvel Trinity and Thanos comes to a head, before the crescendo of spectacle that arises when Doctor Strange rallies the forces of the collective MCU to come to the aid of the Big Three in their final fight against Thanos and his army. Typically, the emotional showdown follows the showdown of spectacle, and this even takes place in Ock's own origin film, Spider-Man 2. The climactic spectacle is in the final physical confrontation, but the emotional weight comes with Otto wrestling with his consequences and his consciousness, the weight of his actions, and the heart-to-heart that he has with Peter that finally pushes him to regain control over his mechanical arm. In the case of No Way Home, it may be that Doc Ock and the Green Goblin are elsewhere, attempting to rupture the folds between realities even further in order to serve their own agendas, waiting to be faced by the Spider-Men after the Statue of Liberty fight. An interesting take on this that has been proposed by many fans, however, is that the Green Goblin is the true antagonist of the film, which has even been widely reported on, serving a sinister agenda that threatens multiversal levels of destruction, and Doc Ock is attempting to either stop or stall Norman Osborn, while the three Spider-Men are preoccupied with the remainder of the film's antagonists, Electro, Sandman, and the Lizard. Some have even gone as so far as to claim that Doc Ock is set to die at the hands of the Green Goblin, bringing a final close to his character arc before the Spider-Man thwart Osborn and his schemes once and for all. The primary piece of contradictory evidence to this claim is Doctor Strange's line about how each of these villains is destined to die to a Spider-Man in their home reality and timeline. But if Doc Ock was pulled from the river before he drowned, then his death in the MCU would not alter the events of the Raimi trilogy, as Doc Ock effectively stopped existing in that universe at the same point in time regardless of his manner of death, though this is contingent on the river being his point of entry into the multiverse, which has yet to be confirmed. This puts Doc Ock in the unique position of having the constant looming threat of death hanging over his head, while many of these other villains likely do not. If the Green Goblin, for example, has to be returned to the point just before he is impaled by his own glider, be it with a memory wipe or just before his death takes place, then we can reasonably deduce that he cannot die in the MCU, simply because we know where his story needs to end. Doc Ock is different, however, because as of now, if he was pulled from the river, then he is still on borrowed time leading up to his eventual demise. Again though, these are comments based on Alfred Molina, and are yet to be formally confirmed. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of the idea of Doc Ock being a protagonist for the bulk of the film? Would you like to see him aid our heroes on their journey, or do you think he is better served as an antagonist alongside the rest of the Sinister Five? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team, and I hope to catch you in the next video.